I'm Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest.
Oh, Gloria, how lovely to have you with me today. Thank you for joining me. Dr. Gloria Lee, you are a psychologist, and I know you've got there's a lot more to you than that, but I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. I mean, you're in Vancouver, and we just talked about that. Our temperatures are quite similar at the moment, so that's quite nice. But yes, I don't know Vancouver very well at all, so please introduce yourself to the listeners, Gloria.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, Wendy, for having me on your show. It's a privilege to be here. As you said, I am a clinical psychologist. I'm an author and also an educator at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. I'm director at Brentwood Counselling Centre, that's also in Vancouver. And what else can I say? I've been married to my husband for 24 years and I have 3 children.
Wow. So you are a busy lady, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've chatted before, haven't we? So we talked about that we do very similar things, me in the UK and you in Vancouver, because we both work with couples. And the thing I wanted to ask you today is, we had a brief discussion before, but what are the things that couples bring to you? What are the common kind of things that they might bring for help with?
Yeah. So the various reasons that they come in. But before I even get into what they come in for, let me tell you the profile of the typical couple that comes in. They're usually between the ages of 35 and 55 years old. If it's a heterosexual relationship, it's usually the female who initiates counseling, unless their partner is given an ultimatum that if we don't go, then it's over. So that's typically how it goes. And at this stage, they usually have between 2 and 3 kids. They're in the height of their career. They're very busy, sometimes taking care of their elderly parents as well. So things have been brewing for several years. Usually it takes between 8 to 10 years before a couple will come for help, even when problems start that long ago. So that's sort of the makeup of the typical couple that comes through my doors. And as much as there's so many different varieties of topics that they come in for, I would sum it up. The top 3 issues that they come in for. Number 1, always communication, conflict. Yeah. And it could be about anything, but they're struggling with how they communicate with each other, and when they have conflicts, how it blows up. The second one is something that's super common, which is they fight about the division of labor or chores or responsibilities, the daily nitty-gritties, because they are so busy. And so they gripe about who's doing what and who's doing too much and too little, who's taking care of the kids, etc. So that's all the little things of life. That's the second thing. And the third one is when one partner is actually done with the marriage and the other one wants to save it. So that desperate partner will say, help, we need help. Yeah. So I would say those are the top 3 things, definitely.
Okay, that's really interesting. I would agree with you. I think communication, absolutely. I would say the next thing that is most common that couples come to me is cheating.
Yeah, that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, that's quite high on the list. And then, I'm done. The relationship's been neglected, and one of them is there's going to be that ultimatum. Either we sort this out or that's the end. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they do come for affairs, definitely, but I don't find that that's really one of the top issues. It's a common one, but if I
Mm,
was to sum up years and years of working with couples,
yeah.
it's kind of it's a given that it's going to be one of these things that brings them in.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah,
Hmm.
I would agree with the same, but it was just interesting that there's a slight, just I've noticed the
Hmm.
cheating, which yeah, so tell me a bit more about this this communication and conflict. What do you think happens there?
Well, that's actually really interesting because here's my theory. It doesn't really matter what couples come in for because any topic they fight about, it kind of funnels into the same thing. It's really about unfinished business from childhood of unmet attachment needs, and it comes out typically during the couple's fights. So let me give you an example. Parenting. So let's say if I'm talking about a heterosexual couple, a wife complains that the husband doesn't help out enough with the kids. He's always busy at work, and she's so overwhelmed, and she's doing so much working and taking care of the kids and the parents, etc. And the husband then defends himself and says, I do a lot and I take care of the family, and you just don't appreciate me, and you're always thinking about things that are, you find something to complain about. So here you have the wife who feels like the husband just doesn't care. Basically, she's been abandoned by him. And she protests by nagging, complaining, criticizing, maybe even asking. And the more she does that, the more he gets defensive because he's always feeling like he's not good enough no matter what he does. So, what does he eventually do? He avoids her just to not hear any of that. So, here you are with this cycle where the wife feels more and more abandoned and angry because he's just retreating and working longer hours, etc. And the husband is doing this because he just never feels like he's good enough. He doesn't feel lovable. Like she just doesn't love him or like him. And when I dig a little further, I find that when I ask about, let's say, the wife's childhood and what happened with her parents growing up, and she would say something like, well, from a very young age, I had to take care of my younger siblings. My parents were busy working. They provided food, clothing, shelter, basic needs. But pretty much I was left to fend for myself, and I had to take care of my younger siblings.
Mm,
There was really no one there for me. So, again, that similar theme of abandonment, who's there for me? Who can see me? Who knows me? Who's going to take care of me? And I asked the husband, tell me a bit more about your childhood. What happened there? And he would say something like, well, my parents were pretty critical, especially my father. Nothing was ever good enough for him. He would criticize everything that I did. If I got, straight A's and one B, he would say, hey, what's up with that B? So it felt like I always had to please him. Nothing was ever good enough. And so over time, I learned to hide by just working harder, staying away from the family, and not sharing anything with my parents.
mm,
So here you are. The husband is doing pretty much the same thing as what he did growing up to
mm.
avoid consequences, being criticized and shamed. And if you were to replace the names of the husband's parents and the wife's parents to the husband and wife now, pretty much they're doing the same thing to each other.
Yeah.
So that it's so interesting when that happens because nobody really realizes it, and nobody even can link the similarities of why certain things trigger us so much.
Mm.
But it's really fascinating how that happens. Mhm.
Absolutely. And either I yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I see that as well. And it is we develop the coping mechanisms to survive as children, and that's
Yes,
what happens, isn't it? So for
it is.
example, with a husband, his coping mechanism was to just retreat when the going
Mhm.
got tough. And then
Mhm.
he carried that on into adulthood, where it served him quite well as a child because he'd put his head down and tried to get the grades. He would keep dad happy, but he would keep out dad's way.
That's right.
But he's doing the same with his partner now. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
But
I I often tell the couple that what helped you back then to protect you, it was very adaptive as a kid, that you had no choice. You had no other way of knowing how to protect yourself. But when you do the same thing as an adult now, it's actually, it works against you, because you're creating the same thing again.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Was it Einstein who said if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's a definition of insanity?
It is. And the interesting thing is, couples usually don't see this. They will focus on their partner and say, they make me feel this way because of what they're doing. If it wasn't for them, then I wouldn't be the way I'm feeling, or how I behave. And so it's a chicken and egg, because I could say to the wife that, well, it's because he avoids you, and that's why you get angrier and more critical of him. And because you're more critical of him, that's why he avoids you, right? Like, there's two wrongs don't make a right. And when we focus on our partner, we're really heading the wrong direction. And it's really about slowing things down. I always say to my couples that the key moments are actually the arguments themselves, because it's the arguments that is the trigger of what we are still lacking, the attachment need that was missing from our childhood. And so the trigger for the wife obviously is, she's abandoned, she's all alone, nobody cares about her in anything they fight about. And for the husband, the common theme is, I'm never good enough no matter what I do. And the shame. And so if they slow down enough in those key moments of the fight, and just to take a step back and know that it's happening again, it's just a different content that we're fighting about, but it's the same theme, always the same theme, then you could slow it down, take a time out if necessary, because sometimes you're just so emotional, you can't think straight. And if you're able to just kind of slow down, back up and look at the bigger picture, we could actually use those key moments of fighting to, instead of repeating the harm that was done to us, we could turn it around and heal each other and heal ourselves of these attachment needs. So it's actually very powerful, those moments, but nobody really knows that. And people just kind of fight, and they go really quickly, and they're not in their head, they're just emotional. So it's such a tricky thing, but if we're able to help couples to really slow down, understand what the trigger is, and ask themselves, what am I feeling, and why am I feeling this right now? And to just maybe ask for what you need from the other person, instead of complain about what you don't have.
Yeah. Or the other one that I hear a lot is, you should know.
Yes. If you really love me, you would know. I won't have to tell you, or I've already told you a million times. Why do I need to say it again? Right? Okay. And, I often will, if they have children, I will say to them, well, have you ever told your kids that you love them? And they'll both say, of course, yes. Did you only say it once? And if your kids ask, do you love me? Well, you say, well, I already told you once, so you should know, right? It's silly. And here's the thing about attachment, is that attachment is ongoing. You have to nurture it for the rest of your life together. So it's not a one-time, I already told you so. And if you don't know, it's almost like a test. If you don't know, then you don't really love me.
Yeah.
Well, do we get it right all the time? No. So why do we expect our partner to always know what we need or what we want? And that's one of the things that get to couples all the time, that they're expecting that we've been together for so long, and if you don't know, then that's it. That really nails it, that you don't care. It really means that. And I say, no, actually, it doesn't mean that. It just means that in this moment, they're struggling with their own internal processes. They're not even thinking about you right now. They're just thinking, how do I protect myself? Because I'm so overwhelmed and I feel so much shame and all of that I'm just thinking about myself. That's all they're thinking about, really.
Yeah. And I think they could just feel that wound, and they can't make sense of what's going on around. All they feel is that, the wound, they've been attacked in their minds, and therefore they need to defend themselves, but that means they're going to attack back. And
That's
the
right.
crazy thing is, I've done it myself in the past. The argument, it's the subject when you get into those really emotional, out of control arguments, you don't even know what the argument started with.
No,
It's
and
not
it
the,
spirals,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. It's not the
Yeah,
content of the argument, it's what's
no,
underneath it.
absolutely. And you already know, Wendy, that couples will come and they'll start talking about one fight, and then they'll talk about this one and this one, and then before you know it, they're talking about like 5 different fights within 5 minutes, and it's always about the details. No, that didn't
Yeah.
happen, you didn't say that, no, this is exactly
Yeah.
what you said, no, this happened first and then this happened. Who cares? Who cares? Like, it's not about who's right or who's wrong. And I often remind couples that our memory's pretty poor, first of all. All of us will remember things the way we remember it, and there'll be certain things that will stand out that you will think, yes, it happened this way, and this is what I said, this is what you said. And you can't argue it with your partner because they will remember it a different way. It doesn't.
Mm.
And who really cares? It's not about the details of the content, but
Yeah.
it's really about, as you said, what's going on underneath that drives this argument right now. And it's
Mm.
always the same. It's not the negative communication. It's really the unmet need that's protecting itself. That's really saying, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you know me? Do you like me? Are you
Yeah.
there for me?
Yeah.
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 And
And
so it's really,
that child could never speak up, could it? That child,
no.
it dealt with things in the best way it knew how, but
Yes.
it was the communication, being able to tell your parents, you're not listening to me, you would probably be reprimanded, and you'd get worse than you'd already experienced. So you just had to learn a way of dealing with it. And
Mm-hmm.
but you're right, and then that becomes, when the adult, the small child is still there within that person saying, but you don't really
Mm-hmm.
care about me, you're not listening to me, you don't love me, you don't bother with me. It's all of that, isn't it? And I think that's the part that many adults just don't get. They say, well, I should have been over that, I should have got over that, but they don't realize how deep those wounds are and how embedded it all is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is so core what you just said, that you're not ever over it, but you've learned
Mm.
to adapt to it, either
Mm.
by protecting yourself in these unhealthy ways. It probably worked as a kid because you had no power or authority or control.
Mm.
So that's the best you could do given your circumstances. But as an adult now, using the same skill set, it becomes maladaptive in a healthy environment where you could do
Yeah.
differently. But because you haven't learned the skills, you're doing the same thing and creating the same environment once again. And so, really, when I do couples work, it's really about doing individual work with two people, but at the same time, so the other person can hear it. And
Yeah.
what that does is, number one, it changes the perspective of the other partner, that when they're able to hear the story of their partner's upbringing, all of a sudden it softens them, because now they get it. They get why the wife is so
Mm.
critical, that she was always alone and no one helped her, and she's feeling the same way again. So and then the wife hears that, well, your dad criticized you all the time and you felt so shamed all the time and not good enough, and I don't want to make you feel that way again. And so somehow when we hear each other's stories, it softens us because we understand. And with understanding, there's compassion. With compassion, then there's change behavior. So now
Yeah.
the next step really is then teaching them the skills that they never received growing up, by being assertive, by learning how to ask each other for what they need, instead of just kind of talking about the content and the surface issues, instead of what's really,
Yeah.
really real deep down inside. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Well, it's a very fascinating conversation. There's a lot that I identify with, but yes, it's lovely to hear your perspective on it as well. So thank you for sharing that today. what is one thing that you could say to couples right now, or even individuals? What is one thing that they could put into action? One tip that would serve them all right now?
I would say in that key moment of a fight, remember that this is not a bad thing. The key, that fight is actually the key to healing yourself and healing each other. If we could think of it that way, then fights are not as scary, and we could do it a little differently. And that's what I would say.
Great. And I think the one where you said time out, I think that's a really powerful I would add that, if I may, because I think that if you're feeling that it's just spiraling to such a degree, then walk away so that you can just collect your thoughts and calm down enough to be able to have a conversation, rather than it becoming. I noticed that what happens when those arguments get really out of control, they get personal insults come into it. And that is so damaging, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I would tell my couples that it takes about 30 seconds for you to get triggered, and it's game over. You're just not in your rational mind anymore. It's all about emotions and protection. But it takes at least 30 minutes for your brain to calm down. So if you feel like your brain is kind of fluttering and getting to that emotional state, that's when you need to call the time out and slow things down. There's no rush. And most of the time, when we're going so fast in an argument, that's when we spiral and it gets out of control. We hurl insults and things that are very, very hurtful, and we cause more damage. So just slow it down. That's it.
Yeah. So tell us about your book. You're an author, so.
Yeah. So last year I wrote a book called The Kick-Ass Couple: 7 Secrets to Transforming Your Relationship. And this is, the funny thing is, this is a book for couples. However, it's actually really for individuals as well. I've gotten more feedback back from individuals than couples, which is I thought was fascinating. But it's really about some of what I just talked about. What are the key things that people get wrong in relationships and why they get in trouble? And how do we very easily and simply course correct these things? And most of it is about your own journey. So you can read it as an individual, and you can also read it as a couple. I do have exercises at the end of each chapter for couples to do together, and you can absolutely do it by yourself as well. So it is made for romantic couples, but I found that it's actually applicable for many people in different types of relationships as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can't wait to read the book, actually. I'm going to get the book. It sounds really good. So thank you so much for today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. What's one easy way that people can get in touch with you? Because I will put all your details in the show notes, but just one easy way.
Just on my website, it has all my details of, my book and my social media, etc. And I have blog posts as well for people who are interested. But my website is drglorialee.com. Pretty easy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've found our conversation fascinating. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you too, Wendy.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.